Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our discussions and our explorations and our journeys with respect to a recent release made by the Criterion Collection earlier this year, I should say, in 2021. And it is a very special set, a collector's set, a Blu-ray set, which is right here. Melvin Van Peebles' Essential Films. And in fact, we have been discussing the works that are included in this wonderful set. And that brings us today to that work from Melvin Van Peebles, which is from 1971. And it has been designated by Criterion at spy number 1095. And the name of the work is SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. This is the extraordinary work from 1971, and it is from that one-of-a-kind, extraordinary filmmaker and artist, Melvin Van Peebles. And it indeed stars Melvin Van Peebles in the key central role of Sweetback. This is, of course, the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. I think if we were to try to focus on the plot or story structure of this film, we would of course be focusing in on the main character of Sweetback. And we understand early on that he is, in terms of his professional and personal existences, he is a character, or he is a person that is known for his sexual prowess, thus perhaps leading to the name or the nickname or the phrase Sweetback. And then we also understand that throughout, or as the film gets going, we see that external forces are at work, and thus will change the life and trajectory of Sweetback forever. And this is the thrust of the film forward, as it were, the trajectory or the propulsion forward of the film. Because then we see the interactions between Sweetback and the authorities, the police characters that we see early on, the white policemen, and we see how these police authority figures are trying to use Sweetback in a way to maybe cover up some other crime of some sort, again using Sweetback as a means of trying to aid their own cover-up of sorts in a separate and unrelated crime. Well, along the way, however, we see not just how Sweetback is affected by this, but another character, the character of Mumu, who is also, we understand, a member of the Black Panthers, and how we see directly, firsthand, in a very famous and an incredibly important scene in the film, the brutality of the police characters here, especially towards the character of Mumu. So we already get this sense of injustice as presented in the world of Sweetback. And then how we see Sweetback, or how Sweetback reacts to this in terms of being pushed to the limit or beyond the limit. And he reacts and he responds. He responds in a way that is very physical and is very violent, but it's also a way that arguably is a means of trying to fight back against what is perceived to be these acts of injustice and brutality, and thus leads the film into this trajectory, this character arc, this journey of Sweetback, and what it is he's trying to do, on the one hand, in trying to reach and meets certain people, certain members of his close-knit community that he's trying to convince to try to help him, and we see the interactions between him and these various characters that we meet. Sometimes we see those scenes played out for humor. Sometimes we see the scenes being yet more examples of, say, shows of the sexual prowess and nature of Sweetback as a human being. And maybe we also see, too, the elements of the external realities, as one might put it. The notion of the authority, as Melvin Van Peebles says, or Mario Van Peebles and others say in the supplements and elsewhere, what happens when the man is trying to put you down. And so what Sweetback seems to be doing here is trying to essentially fight back and resist and evade and escape. And this is the crux of the character arc or journey of Sweetback, who becomes the hero and the main character of this particular story. And we follow him and we follow his various encounters. We see him also encountering other figures of authority, and we see how he is able, if at all, to escape those situations, how he's able, if at all, to escape those situations either through his own acts or will, or perhaps the circumstances or situations that are established vis-a-vis the rest of the community that seem also to be not just on the periphery of many of these scenes, but also arguably it could be said to be front and center in a lot of these particular situations that are set up and then paid off as part of the overall plot progression of the film. And indeed, that is, I think, that is the basis for it not being a coincidence that this film, in terms of its opening credits, cites the cast as being the black community. And that's another point, too, that is mentioned quite maybe indirectly and indeed directly in some of the supplemental materials, which we will get to in the latter half of this video discussion. But this is the setup or establishment or the plot propulsion of this extraordinary work, Sweetback's Badass Song. And so we follow this character, and sometimes the situations that we see Sweetback engaged in, sometimes they are very shocking, and sometimes they are very funny, and sometimes they are very much filled with a type of humanity and humane warmth. I draw your attention, and sometimes maybe it's a combination of those and other elements. And that's one of the great key focal points of the grand artistry and the depth of the creative soul and spirit of Melvin Van Peebles and company, that they are able to get at the very heart of what these particular points mean, not just in terms of a historical context and social context, which is very important, of course, this being a film from the early 1970s, but also in terms of the universality of these particular points of appeal that make this film not just timeless, but also so significant, so profoundly significant in terms of what it is it's trying to say and what it is that it is. So that is, I think, a really fundamental key point of the artistic and creative success of a work like Sweetback's Badass Song. There is also a way in which the film is, or can be said to be, very much having a real intense vitality, almost to the point of putting the viewer on edge in terms of the way it confronts the viewer or challenges the viewer in terms of various depictions of Sweetback and the way it progresses. I just point to the incredibly shocking way the film opens, and I'll also get to that particular point, the opening credits or the pre-credits leading to the opening credits. And I'll get to that point too, because it's really discussed in a very interesting way in some of the supplemental features. In particular, I should point out well, I'll point it out later, but there's an interesting dialogue between Melvin Van Peebles and Mario Van Peebles in the context of a commentary track for the film Badass by Mario Van Peebles. And they mention the feelings of Mario Van Peebles during or with regard to this opening of the film Sweetback's Badass Song. And so this is to say, or this is an example of where we can say that this film, Sweetback's Badass Song, is a film that is not always easy And in fact, it can be quite difficult. And in fact, it can be extremely difficult and quite challenging. And there are points where it has been the subject of a lot of criticism. And we will also get to those criticisms and where they are discussed, because they are mentioned, I think, quite directly in some of the supplemental features in a really excellent way of analysis and discussion. And so this is a film that is, again, filled with so many ideas, so many notions, so many challenges, and that makes for, I think, very compelling cinema indeed, and sometimes uneasy, sometimes quite uneasy situations that are presented in this particular work. But that is the point, or that is one of the points of this film and Melvin Van Peebles' art and his spirit, after all, in terms of what it is he seems to be trying to express in a work like Sweetback. And the nature of the almost the volatile danger of what we can call the external realities of the particular moment, on the one hand, but also how he is trying to confront and show and also provide a sense of release and also a sense of triumph in terms of these, or in the face of these external realities, thus giving rise to the sense of this feeling of satisfaction and elation that we know that this film engendered with its audiences at the time, and indeed contemporary audiences, and which led to its groundbreaking success, really groundbreaking success in terms of its status as an art house independent film, and thus leading the way for Melvin Van Peebles to be known under many reasons. He is known for this film and others as being a real type of leader and pioneer when it comes to what's known as modern African American cinema, or black cinema. And he's also known, or he should be known, as well as being one of the pioneering spirits, one of the most successful pioneering spirits in the what is ultimately to become the movement of art house independent cinema in the United States, starting from the early 1970s. I mean, it in many ways it starts from a film like Sweetback's Badass Song. And so there are so many elements in terms of the energy, in terms of the independent creative spirit, the type of raw passion that is also involved, that is telling us or showing us or presenting us with concepts and notions and ideas that are challenging, that are oftentimes difficult and uneasy, that are oftentimes very much filled with a type of creative passion and energy, that are also filled with humor and wit and comedy, and are also filled with images of sometimes very unsettling acts of violence. And there's also the way in which Sweetback as a character is expressing his own masculinity and sexuality, and how these situations might or might not also be said to be representations on a type of macro level in terms of representations of sexuality in cinema, and thus how this might also play into representations of race in cinema. And we will get to this particular discussion point as well, because it's discussed so well in one of the supplements, or many of the supplements, but in particular there's one supplement. It's called a scholars panel, but this idea of representations of race and sexuality, and the very fact of its existence, and also what it's telling in terms of its story and the audience that it seems to be addressing, as well as what it's saying about the world overall, and also what it's saying about cinema overall. And so this is the real example of the strength of a film like Sweetback's Badass Song, and just how unforgettable a viewing experience it is, and just how extraordinary, and also how unsettling, and also how bold, and also how intensely artistically creative it is. I mean, that's another thing too, which we should mention, which is that this film It is an independently made film, and if you know the details about the production, you will marvel at just how extraordinary that this film was made, given its particular set of circumstances during the production. I mean, it is an extraordinary achievement. And it is also extraordinary in the fact that we also see exemplified in the work itself the cinematic style of Melvin Van Peebles, which we'd already seen in his prior works, Story of a 3-Day Pass and Watermelon Man, where it's seen certain aspects of a type of creative, almost experimental type of style in terms of the visual representations and the visual types of presentations that are made in those films, and the way in which music interweaves with certain aspects of, say, a quality that sometimes enters into, say, a dreamlike quality, but then suddenly turns the corner into a type of direct, almost in-your-face type of rugged style, and how those aspects are captured. For instance, in the Story of the 3-Day Pass, sometimes there is a mention of the fact how it could be said that that film has certain echoes or certain maybe similarities with what is known as the French New Wave. But I think in a film like SWEETBACK'S Badass Song, we have these wonderful flourishes of style in terms of the visuals and also the sounds and the music. And we have this type of overlapping imagery, the use of colors that tend to become very saturated and very stylized to the point of showing a type of or reminding us that this is a work of cinema, but also giving us a sense of reality and fantasy, and this type of interesting divide or connection between the two, and how this plays into the inherent spirit of the film itself, and how it seems to operate both in the contemporary, in the moment of the time that it was made, and also in terms of its universal lasting appeal. And so it's all embedded in the style and the cinematic stylings and approach of Melvin Van Peebles, the filmmaker and artist, as well as the music too. This is another important key point of the music, not just the way in which it serves the art of the world itself, but also how it helped or it was one of the ways in which the film could be promoted, because there are also many limitations in terms of the promotion of the work and how it was shown, etc., and its rating, and the issue with the MPAA, and all this stuff which will come up in the supplements. But to bring it back to the soundscape and the music and Earth, Wind, and Fire, this is so rich, and it is such a collection, a brilliant and profoundly significant collection of artistic points, of deeply effective artistic points that come together and combine and merge and blend and become this extraordinary, groundbreaking, landmark film that is still resonant, that is still powerful, that is still funny, that is still filled with heart, and that is still filled with shock and awe, and filled with that undeniable creative vigor and spirit and energy from this artist of great vision, Melvin Van Peebles, in this work, SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. Now, with this particular box set release, Melvin Van Peebles Essential Films, we know that SWEETBACK'S Badass Song is included in this particular release. It's given spine number 1095, and the film itself is purported to be based upon the 4K digital restoration, which was taken up in significant part by Vinegar Syndrome as well. And in fact, when you play the film at the very end, the Vinegar Syndrome logo will emerge. And so that brings up the point that this film too is made available in a wonderful release by Vinegar Syndrome, but it's also made available here in the Criterion collection. So if you want to be maybe complete in terms of what is available in terms of the latest physical media releases of this film, it might be worthwhile to check out the Vinegar Syndrome release as well. But for purposes of today, let's focus on the Criterion release. I should say too that the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song is emerging in this recent 2021 Blu-ray box set release. But as some of us know, this is not the first time that this film was in the Criterion collection, because in fact we had seen it in this particular release, this is one of the releases here, Laserdisc release, Sweetback's Badass Song. And in fact, on this particular Laserdisc release was the option of listening to the commentary track for the film from Melvin Van Peebles himself. And one of many great things of this new release from Criterion is the fact that we can still get that commentary track from Melvin Van Peebles from 1997. We can hear it as a possible audio option here, and it is great. It is great. Melvin Van Peebles is just, he's one of those artists and one of those individuals that when you listen to him and when he speaks, you just have to listen, because everything he says is so captivating. And he says this in this lovely, warm, almost nonchalant way that is very welcoming. And when he tells his stories and when he gives his details about his perspectives on the various aspects of the production, etc., this is so brilliant. And there are moments in the commentary track where I was just bursting out laughing. I was marveling at how wonderful Melvin Van Peebles' stories were and his recollections, and some of them were just so funny as well as so illuminating, and just learning so much from this individual, who has so much experience and intelligence, and he's expressing it in this very honest way. And this is wonderful commentary track. So please check out the film with the Melvin Van Peebles commentary track if you can. It's great. For instance, he speaks about certain aspects of the production, for example, his interactions with the unions, and how this had to essentially be off the radar of the unions. That was part of the production issues. And so one of the ways that he and the crew were able to try to do this was to try to give the impression to the outside world that this was a film that was it was a pornographic movie. And so that was one of the approaches of the film. Now we know that there are certain scenes of sort of a sexual, explicit nature that are included within this film. And as Melvin Van Peebles also says, he uses the word salacious, and that part of his film style, at least as embodied in this film, is to also capture the salacious nature of the various aspects of the world in which he is depicting, included in which, or at the very center of which, is the character of Sweetback, who we know, based on his own acknowledgement of his sexual prowess and power, that is focused in on his physical sexuality. This becomes, I think, one of the ways in which this film shows again, to borrow the word from Melvin Van Peebles, the salacious nature. And so it's interesting how there is this overlap or intersection between the life in terms of the production history or details, and then the art itself, the specific story points of the film. And that point, I think, or that connection is made really well as part of this commentary discussion. He also talks about, speaking of the salacious scenes, he also speaks about how there are some scenes where he actually had his own father, Melvin Van Peebles' father, be part of those scenes. And so that served as a type of way in which, or a type of emollient, if you will, in terms of maybe diffusing some of the tension on set, which can, I think, naturally arise due to maybe the embarrassing nature, or the somewhat, again, to use the word, salacious nature of some of the scenes that were being shot. If the father of the filmmaker, director, is on set, then that should be okay, or that should make it okay. So that was one of the anecdotal points of Melvin Van Peebles here in this commentary track. And he's also talking about some of the specific scenes. There are some really famous scenes. There are so many famous scenes in this film. For instance, there's a scene involving a police car and fire, type of firebomb moment that leads to the fire engines and other authorities coming in to try to put out the fire. There's a shot of the community reacting. There's also, it's very important in the plot of Sweetback himself. And Melvin Van Peebles mentions how the scene was shot, what it is he had to do. This was an actual thing going on, and so he just had the cameras roll. And so this is an example too of Melvin Van Peebles really taking advantage and just using everything at his disposal and his resources, as limited as they were. He was really pushing them to the max and creating these iconic images. From, again, admittedly very limited resources, but he uses those limited resources not just well, but not just extraordinary well, but to this degree that is genius level artistry. So that's another great example of this. Also, he speaks too about the not just pre-production and production itself, but also post-production issues. I mentioned in passing in the discussion so far about how this had a lot of uphill battles even during post-production and its release, and had a very limited avenue in terms of its release. Only a number of theaters were willing and able to release this film or to show this film because of certain avenues that were cut off due to its X rating. And he mentions too his run-ins with the MPAA, and how there was this rule, or reminding us about how if a film was not submitted to the MPAA for a type of ratings review, then there was this rule about how the film had to have a self-imposed X rating. And thus he tells the details about how this ultimately led to one of the most famous taglines in terms of the X rating, rated X by an all-white jury. And this is something too that also shows the almost the entrepreneurial spirit of Melvin Van Peebles too, because he mentions in the commentary track about how he was able to market this and brand the film in terms of the marketing, and also sell T-shirts as well based on this particular phrase. And so, and it's a really charming moment of the commentary. And he also speaks about the trajectory of the character of Sweetback, because if we remember, or if we follow the character of Sweetback from the beginning to the middle to the end, we understand that at the very start of the film, there's the intense moment in terms of what happens to the police and Moo and Sweetback at that really frightening night scene. And what happens between Sweetback and Moo, and there's this expression about, what do we do, and what is this thing about we, and this idea expressed about how maybe at this point Sweetback is maybe a type of apolitical figure. He is a figure that is not he's not espousing any type of political type of feelings or thought or opinions. He's very much about himself, right? That's why he rejects the word we when he's asked this question from Moo. But only later do we realize, during various scenes, for instance, Melvin Van Peebles cites as an example a scene involving a pastor of a congregation and the interaction between this character and Sweetback, and how this point marks one of the key moments of the political education, as Melvin Van Peebles puts it, of the character of Sweetback, only leading to, or thus leading to, various conclusions or the resolutions of the character arc of Sweetback. There's an incredible moment involving the character, a biker character played by John Amos. It's referred to as Johnny Amos in the credits, and also by Melvin Van Peebles in the commentary track. And there's this really powerful moment in terms of this character and Moo and Sweetback, and about how Sweetback seems to be acknowledging or recognizing that there are things more important than the self, and there are things more important than him. And so he realizes that the importance of the future is what's at stake. And there's this close-up of a handshake between two characters, which is incredibly powerful and incredibly moving. And it's an incredible humane moment. It has aspects of the political, yes. It has aspects of a type of maybe a type of social import, yes. But it is also an incredibly powerful and poignant and moving and heartfelt connection, or depiction of connection, a humane connection between characters. And this is, I think, one of the strengths of Melvin Van Peebles. He's able to use so many layers that can be said to be layers of irony, layers of wit, a type of intelligent irony, a sense of satire that also is connected to or touching upon the social commentary and the political ramifications of the particular shots or scenes or plot points of the film. But he always has the sense of the human and the humane. And I think this moment of the handshake is so profoundly moving in that regard, as well as other multi-leveled regards. It's a great example of the genius of Melvin Van Peebles in this and throughout the film itself. And also he talks too about what it was he wanted as an artist. There are some scenes involving overlapping color images, the way the lights are shown, and scenes are overlapping, and the colors, as I say, are changing within the frame. But this is what he wanted. This is what Melvin Van Peebles wanted. And he also says something so profound too, which is that while we have these stylized moments of the film, there are also ways in which Melvin Van Peebles, as the artist, wanted to show the reality, what he calls the reality of certain situations, and that he felt that this was so important to capture because he knew that the audiences would not just understand these elements of reality, but also react to them in a way that we know they did react. The audiences, as I say, were really, it was a hugely popular film. And so this is, I think, such a great example of the way in which this film balances quote-unquote aspects of reality versus quote-unquote aspects of fantasy. And so this is such a and just again, let me continue here with this great commentary, which is he also speaks about the use of the music and also the various actors that sometimes appear in certain anecdotes about them. He's talking, for instance, about one of the actors that is seen in the desert with the dog. He's also talking about a particular actor and a stutter and how that was dealt with in a very interesting way. And he's also talking about other aspects of his career and the like. He speaks about Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death and his work on Broadway. And we'll get to his work on Broadway when we talk about the other film in this great set. But this is just an overall wonderful commentary from Melvin Van Peebles, and he's very direct, but he's also very, I think, very casual, and also it's just filled with energy or filled with a type of enthusiasm, and also a type of he's showing his profound intelligence, and he's very sharp, and he's always just giving us this account, this narrative, these anecdotes. It's wonderful Melvin Van Peebles way. So the commentary track to the film, please check it out if you can. It is so worth it. But that's not all, because then we have a number of supplements on the disc. I should say too that this is a 2-disc Blu-ray release of the film, and so I'm referring to the first disc, which has the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. So we have the film, and then we have the commentary track on such first disc, and then we have the supplements included with such first disc. So the first of such supplements is the introduction by Melvin Van Peebles himself. This is also described as being from 1997, approximately 2 to 3 minutes. And so he talks about what he describes as the 4 principles or the 4 guiding points that he wanted to achieve in this film, Sweetback, and he says that he was able to achieve them, and the way he expresses them and describes them is incredibly dynamic, and also very charismatic, and also very much part of the Melvin Van Peebles style. So please check this out if you can. Again, it's approximately 2 minutes. And then the next supplement on the first disc is a conversation between Mario Van Peebles and Elvis Mitchell. And this is described as being from 2021. This is a Criterion produced discussion between these two gentlemen. It is approximately 23 minutes. And here we have Mario Van Peebles, the son of Melvin Van Peebles, speaking to us about the career and legacy, and just celebrating the life and legacy of Melvin Van Peebles, and talking so in wonderful, intimate terms. For instance, Mario Van Peebles mentions early on about how there were many different Melvins, there were many aspects of the complex nature of the artistic character and spirit, and also personality of Melvin Van Peebles. And he had this way almost of a type of compartmentalization in the way he approached certain aspects of his very eventful life and career. And this idea of different Melvins is so wonderful, especially coming from Mario Van Peebles, because as we know, Mario Van Peebles made the film BAADASS, which is a sort of a film which is covering Melvin Van Peebles and his struggles and his eventual triumph with the making of the film SWEETBACK'S BAADASS Song. And one of the aspects, and it's part of the supplements, it's going to be discussed, with respect to the second disc. That's part of this, but part of that is the fact that in that film BAADASS, Mario Van Peebles has the character in that film, the personage of Melvin Van Peebles, who is played by Mario, by the way. Melvin Van Peebles is struggling also, not just with the external struggles of the filmmaking process for this film, but also internally. There are moments in the film where we see Melvin Van Peebles struggling with himself, and we have two different Melvins on the same screen space at the same time. And I love that. Therefore, I love this detail that Mario Van Peebles brings up here in terms of the different Melvins. Wonderful comment here. Mario Van Peebles just has this great way of expressing it, both in conversation and also in his own art and his own cinema. And he also talks about one of the key, I think, strengths of the film, and it's acknowledged by many other people as well, which is the idea how Sweetback as a character is not necessarily a character that is this maybe a character filled with a moral nobility. On the contrary, Sweetback as a character is seen as maybe being almost somewhat vulgar, somewhat brutish, and also very much maybe antithetical to certain Hollywood depictions of black characters at or around that same time. And so, but this is one of the strengths of the film, and I think everyone acknowledges this, especially Mario Van Peebles and Elvis Mitchell and others, because this is showing a type of earnest portrayal from the viewpoint of Melvin Van Peebles. This is showing a type of experience, a real lived-in experience. The point is, not everyone is meant to be a type of character of nobility, and this idea of acceptance based on a type of overachievement in terms of Hollywood depictions at the time is probably itself problematic. It is problematic, and Mario Van Peebles and Elvis Mitchell, I think, discuss as much. And so the idea is, what is the price paid for trying to have these so-called or seemingly overachieving images of black characters on screen versus how we can deal with these types of problematic images when we have characters like Sweetback in films like SWEETBACK'S BAADASS Song. So I think this is, and the idea of, and as Mario Van Peebles explains it, after all, we are human. And so this is, I think, one of the key strengths of a film like Sweetback and a character like Sweetback. And I'm so glad that they're discussing it in those terms. The idea of multiplicity of roles. There's this way in which not everyone is different. Everyone has this unique nature. And that is certainly true for Sweetback. His nature and his character is very unique and very much, I think, one of a kind. But that's also one of the ways in which I think a lot of people can gravitate towards his story, because he is able to triumph because of, or perhaps in spite of, a lot of his own character traits as well. And so there is that aspect, I think, that type of the attention towards the human, which I like how Mario Van Peebles explains it. And also he's talking too about how this is a film where it was very inspirational, and how it helped to pave the way for Mario Van Peebles' own career as a filmmaker and artist. And so in terms of the generational connections between the generation of Melvin Van Peebles and the generation of Mario Van Peebles and his contemporaries as well. And there's a wonderful exchange that Mario Van Peebles has in this interview discussion. so poignant and so powerful. And also just the working relationship and the relationship between father and son, between Melvin and Mario, and how they had this ability or the chance to work together also professionally. And there were some really lovingly portrayed anecdotes that Mario Van Peebles has about how his father and he met certain executives at trying to get certain films made. But while Melvin Van Peebles was Mario Van Peebles was trying to be somewhat diplomatic with this executive, Melvin Van Peebles was perhaps not so diplomatic. But this leads to a lovely comment by Mario Van Peebles, where he says about his father, maybe at the time where he was making films, maybe he didn't have the luxury to be diplomatic. And I thought that was such a profoundly moving statement, because it shows this idea, this feeling of sympathy or empathy that Mario Van Peebles has towards his father, and about he acknowledges how the circumstances and environments, while perhaps in contemporary times have its share of challenges in terms of trying to make a film in Hollywood, for example, still Mario Van Peebles acknowledges that the challenges were so immense and so deep during the time of his father and the early 1970s that it was a type of miracle that a film like SWEETBACK'S BAADASSSSS was in fact made, and it has this everlasting appeal even now. So that is a really lovely comment from Mario Van Peebles, acknowledging the circumstances of his father making this film. And also he mentions too, Mario Van Peebles talks about his own film Badass, and about how he was trying to tell the story. And he has this comment which is so fascinating. He says, the film making Badass was like psychotherapy on celluloid for me, which is, I think, wow. And we'll get to that too when we talk about the film Badass, because that is another fascinating story in and of itself. But it's great to hear Mario Van Peebles mention it in those terms. And also the way the conversation ends here. Mario Van Peebles has that lovely anecdote about a bumblebee. And we hear the story of the bumblebee. It's told by Melvin Van Peebles himself throughout parts of the supplements throughout this box set. The idea about how a bumblebee is not, in terms of its physical design, it's not aerodynamic. And it shouldn't be able to fly, but it flies anyway. So don't tell the bumblebee that, because it still endeavors to fly, and it indeed does. And so this is the metaphor for the creative and endeavoring and pioneering spirit of Melvin Van Peebles. And this is the metaphor and story that concludes this beautiful conversation between Elvis Mitchell and Mario Van Peebles. Please check it out if you can. It is really wonderful, wonderful stuff. And that's not all, because then we get an approximately 13-minute segment of an interview from 1971, the Detroit Tube Works TV show. And this is also in the context of, or in regards to, the opening weekend of the film in Detroit, again in 1971. And there's this idea, the concept of rated X by an all-white jury, and the story about the circumstances regarding submission or non-submission, as the case may have it, to the MPAA. And there's a real funny, I was watching it and I was just laughing out loud. It was so funny, which was the interviewer was asking Melvin Van Peebles, what's a sweetback? And Melvin Van Peebles just very calmly explains the concept of a sweetback. And it's one of the funniest things. And it just shows I think the underlying wit and humor of Melvin Van Peebles, which is commented upon so many places by Mario Van Peebles and others, about how he was so clever, and he was always trying to just deliver a type of this cutting-edge humor in his situations. And we see, I think, an example of that in this particular interview segment. And it's handled so well, and it's so funny and memorable. And it's also very important, too, because this is one of the key aspects of the Sweetback character. So, and then there's other aspects of this 13-minute or so interview talking about censorship, talking about music in films, and where the film was shot in Watts, Los Angeles, and the reaction to the film, the importance of the soundtrack, etc., and his past works like Watermelon Man, etc. So this is another great one. So please check out the Detroit Tube Works interview with Melvin Van Peebles if you can. Again, approximately 13 minutes. And that's not all, because then we have what's called a scholars panel. And this is from 2021. This is a Criterion produced supplement, approximately 25 minutes. And this is with Gerald R. Butters Jr. and Amy Abugo-Ongiri and Novotny Lawrence. And these are three scholars who are talking, I think, over Zoom. It's an online conversation that's recorded. And they're talking about the significance and impact of this film, SWEETBACK'S Badass Song, in the course of cinema, the course of black cinema, and also the course of cinema writ large. It is such an important work. And they talk about how they first saw the film. I think they each mentioned how they first saw it in grad school and how it just blew their minds. It just was so mind-blowing. A type of a cinematic experience. And they talk about the film in the context or the discussion of what later became known as blaxploitation. And they do mention the film, for example, Cotton Comes to Harlem, but they also talk about what happened after the release and eventual super success of SWEETBACK'S Badass Song, and they talk about what happened afterwards. And this, I think, leads to some interesting connections, but also distinctions between a film like SWEETBACK on the one hand and maybe the other films in the so-called era of blaxploitation that followed. But focusing in on this film, the Melvin Van Peebles work, for a moment too, they once again talk about there is a type of generational reaction to the film that they recognize. For instance, the younger audiences seem to be really responding to it very positively. The idea of the X rating, it's posited how this may have been one of the ways in which this film was so successfully marketed as well. This type of film that one is forbidden to see. Well, if you have a film that that someone says you can't see, then you want to see it anyway. So it has that type of appeal. And then also there were the critics who were also reacting against the film, and how there were certain voices from what the scholars here describe as the so-called generation that was really focused on civil rights in the 1960s, and how some of these voices, for instance, voices from the so-called black arts movement, also were almost bemoaning certain aspects of this film and really heavily criticizing certain aspects of this film as well. And actually we'll get some sense of that criticism in the following supplement to this first disc of this film, SWEETBACK. But this leads to, I think, a really fascinating discussion between and among the scholars here about how we have this film and the reaction to the film. It became a very participatory movie experience. People were really having fun in the audience. They were talking to the screen. They were talking with each other, just engaging vocally with the film as it was being shown in the theaters. And how a film like this could never be made in Hollywood, maybe then, and could never be made even now in terms of its subject matter, perhaps. And how certain aspects also from social and political communities reacted to this film. Of course, Huey P. Newton and the Black Panthers and their reaction to this film, and how they really advocated for this film and supported it and really encouraged their membership to watch the film and to support it and to watch it over and over again, and how therefore that might be lending itself towards a certain reading of the film in terms of maybe it could be seen, or it might be seen as promoting certain values or ideals of what is known as, or what is referred to as, the Black Power movement. On the contrary, the scholars also recognize that there are certain, as I say, certain voices in what is regarded as the black arts movement that is very critical of a film like SWEETBACK in terms of, say, the way in which it depicts seemingly vulgar depictions of sexuality and violence. It doesn't therefore have any type of quote-unquote functional purpose in terms of the betterment of the community and society, and perhaps its lack of functional purpose means it's derogatory and it's antithetical to the benefits and the purposes of positive images or positive depictions of the community and society in films like SWEETBACK. So, and also the idea too of I think what the scholars in this discussion say in maybe response to those criticisms, though, is that they posit I think very successfully and very reasonably, they posit the notion that perhaps indeed a film like Sweetback's Badass Song is indeed encompassing something of what could be described as being the functional purpose of a film made in this particular point in time. Because we go back to this idea of depicting reality and fantasy in the context of the cinema style of Melvin Van Peebles. And the idea here, I think, posited so well is the idea of how fantasy, as encompassed in this film, is not just embodied in the visuals, but it's also embodied in the story itself, because it was rare, if not impossible, to see a cinematic depiction of this black character that triumphs in this way. And so, facing these forces, very adverse forces against him, that are seeking not just to stop him, but to kill him or to obliterate him, and to see him triumph in these particular circumstances. This gives rise to a sense of a type of fantasy, because perhaps this was not really, not necessarily a reflection of what was happening in reality at the time, but it does give a sense of a type of intellectual empowerment, because it provides that fantasy freedom and liberation to believe that, yes, this can happen. It is happening in a film that I'm watching. It is happening in this fantasy context, but it is indeed something that I can believe in and I can support and I can really cheer on. And so that becomes one way that this film arguably has this functional purpose or functionality, giving the viewership of the film a sense of what could be possible in terms of changing mindsets, which at the end of the day is a very important thing in terms of turning a mindset that is maybe pessimistic due to external forces, turning it into the sense of possibility or optimism. And that change of mindset, I think, is very, very significant indeed. They also talk about, the scholars here too, talk about the complicated nature of the gender politics of this film, and how the emphasis, or the emphasis of Sweetback and his sexual prowess, and the phrase here by one of the scholars here, it's an independent film that is, quote, the greatest celebration of black phallic masculinity ever made. And I think this is pointing to the fact of Sweetback and his character and what it is he is known for. His sexual prowess is what it is he's known for. And so this leads to a really fascinating discussion of the complex nature of this film in the context of gender politics and the discussion of gender politics, and the idea about how this relates to race and racial representations in society and culture at the time, because it might have been perceived or thought that in order to be able to, or one line of thinking at the time was that in order to try to create seemingly successful images and representations of race, one must show strong images and representations of black masculinity. And therefore the idea of masculinity and this type of sexuality and the importance of maintaining that becomes, in certain voices of the community anyway, one of the really key points in trying to express race and racial identity and representation in the mainstream, for example, in entertainment and cinema and film, etc. And how perhaps this approach towards representation and the focus on masculinity might be, or perhaps was and is, to the detriment of expressions and voices regarding other aspects of gender. Therefore, the film Sweetback and the way in which its character is portrayed and how it was seen by certain pockets of the community might also suggest a real complex way and very maybe uneasy and nuanced way that this film sits, again, in the context of gender politics. And so I think these scholars really point that out really, really astutely. One other thing, too, that they point out is the real, I think, uneasy and very controversial way that the film opens. As we know, the film opens with the young Sweetback, the young boy Sweetback, played by the director's son, Mario Van Peebles, and we see a very explicit scene of sex between him and a woman. And this is while the credits are rolling. And this conversation between and among the scholars, I think, is really important on this particular point. They do express how it might have been, or they express their discomfort, their extreme discomfort with this scene and how it was depicted, and it left them very uneasy. And maybe they acknowledge how this might be maybe an artistic wrong move on the part of what Melvin Van Peebles was trying to show in this particular sequence of the film. And indeed, for me too, it is a very disturbing moment of the film, and I'm very uneasy with this particular moment, although I can still acknowledge the importance of the film overall. This moment, the opening, is very, very difficult for me. What the scholars here try to suggest, however, is while they are voicing their own discomfort, extreme discomfort with this particular moment, they also suggest that as a type of artistic representation, they see how maybe this is part of that discussion of the way in which masculinity is emphasized, or maybe even overemphasized in the context of certain ways in which race and racial representation are made by certain pockets of the community, to the point where manhood eclipses childhood, as expressed quite directly in a scene like this. And also the idea of maybe it was a wrong-headed move in terms of having the scene, but still, it can be said to be trying to look at sexual politics of Black oppression, the sexual politics of Black oppression. And this statement, I think, means this notion of emphasizing sexual prowess and manhood in order to give an expression in visual terms to the frustration felt against notions and the external pressures of Black oppression. So this is, in that context, it becomes a very powerful moment. Again, it's quite disagreeable in many ways, I think, in terms of what it's actually showing, but still, the scholars, I think, try to give this maybe broad context to what it seems to be representing in the grand scheme of the film. So kudos to the scholars for discussing it in those terms. And the idea too of it's a great conversation overall. The discussion of what is often termed as the so-called quote-unquote revolutionary aesthetic, but this is also, I think, a very paradoxical approach, because on the one hand, the film might be seen to be revolutionary, but also it might be seen to be very much a type of a handmade film. But that is part of its strength. Part of its strength, that it's made so obviously outside of the mainstream, and it becomes so successful. That in itself becomes this great statement. Its existence is a great statement, as well as the continuing expression of Melvin Van Peebles. So the scholars panel discussion is so rich and filled with information and knowledge, so please check it out if you can. That's not all, because then we get the Black Journal show. This was dated October 19th, 1971. And featured in this show, approximately 23 minutes, Melvin Van Peebles, as well as Clayton Riley, Francis Ward, and A. Peter Bailey. And here we have various voices, some from what I understand, or what was referred to in the scholars panel as the Black arts community. And this is the Black arts movement. And these are voices that are very critical of Sweetback's Badass Song, and they're saying it on camera, and they're telling some of the people featured here talking about how the fact that it's declaring at the very outset, it's starring the Black community, how this is an affront, this is an insult, because the argument goes is that it is using this as a way to pervert the involvement of the Black community, especially in the context of a film that they criticize as being maybe vulgar or sexually explicit, or not with any type of function or benefit towards the community. So this idea of the critics of the film calling the film vulgar or perverse. And then there are other critics of the film, other people who are saying that it's one of the best. Clayton Riley, for instance, declares at the outset this is one of the best Black films that he has ever seen. So there is disagreement here, and so the idea of what is film art in the context of race representations, what is film art in the context of revolutionary spirit in films? Is this really a revolution? Is this a film which is really encapsulating the revolutionary aesthetic, or is it just an exploitation film? And so this discussion is being had here, and it was touched upon, as I say, in the scholars panel, but it's nice to see it expressed here in the contemporary setting of 1971. And then we also have Melvin Van Peebles featured as well, and we see him talking. We see him sitting next to a tree and talking in this beautiful, lovely day in the park, and he's directly challenging a lot of these criticisms made towards him and towards the film, and he's trying to say how this is indeed an authentic representation from his point of view, and it was something of such a high degree of authenticity that it had never been seen in any type of, say, Hollywood depiction of race and racial representations. And so this was one of the things he was trying to address. And so therefore, by its very act of existing, we have something that has a certain type of form and function within the context of the Black community. And therefore that justifies and also that celebrates the way in which the Black community is referred to expressly in the opening credits of the film. And so we have Melvin Van Peebles and his comments here, but also there's this, the way that the segment ends is, you've got to see it. It's just, there's something of a Melvin Van Peebles just shows just the type of person he is and his wit and charm, and the way this segment ends it's really quite lovely. So please check this out if you can. It's just great. It's so great. So this is the Black Journal segment from 1971, again approximately 23 minutes. And then we have the trailer, and then the trailer is another great example of the energy as captured in this short segment here, again for the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. So far we have been talking about all of those supplements that are included on the first disc of this particular 2-disc Blu-ray release of the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. The film itself plus those supplements that I've just described. But that's not all, because we have the second disc, disc 2 of this particular release. And this is also filled with so much stuff. This is packed. This is utterly packed. So what do we have on the second disc? We have the film from 2004. This is from the filmmaker, director, artist Mario Van Peebles, the son of Melvin Van Peebles. And this is the film Badass. We have this great film which is telling the story of Melvin Van Peebles from the point after he has made Watermelon Man and he's enjoyed a certain degree of commercial and critical success in Hollywood, Columbia Pictures, with Watermelon Man, and he was facing the possibility of having a multi-picture contract with a major Hollywood studio at the start of this the story, but he essentially rejects this. He turns it down in order to devote his life and finances and energy to making what ends up becoming SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. And we have this story of Melvin Van Peebles played with such heart and such sincerity by Mario Van Peebles. Mario Van Peebles plays Melvin Van Peebles here, and so it's the story of the making of SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. This is so great on so many levels. It is, I think, it's an entertaining film. It's a story about a struggle, and it's a real story about the type of struggle against certain seemingly obstacles that seemingly cannot be overcome. And so we see this story of success, because we know ultimately that the film was made and it was a success, but how was it made, and what were the details and particulars around this, and the struggles? And there were so many struggles and many details that emerge in this film that don't emerge, for instance, elsewhere in some of the supplements. So the film is a narrative film. Yes, it is a film that has certain fictionalized aspects to it, and the filmmakers, there's a commentary track as well, and they acknowledge as such how some of the aspects are fictionalized for purposes of of the film or the running time, etc. But there are other aspects too that are based on real events. And so one of those aspects is the physical toll that the making of the film had on Melvin Van Peebles' health and his eye health, for example. And also the details and circumstances in terms of the relationship, the actual father-son relationship between Melvin and Mario. And this comes out in a number of very key scenes in the film Badass. So the film is an entertainment film. It is also an example of the great art and artistry of Mario Van Peebles. And also it is a great testament and celebration of Melvin Van Peebles and the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. And also it is telling certain details of the making of the film. And so it serves also as a wonderful reminder and great supplement to the various features that are included as part of the exploration of the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. So overall, it's a wonderful inclusion. It is so great. And also, we have the optional audio commentary track to the film Badass, which is also from 2004, and it features Melvin Van Peebles and Mario Van Peebles, and it's a discussion between these two men, and they're talking. It's so great. For instance, the film Badass oftentimes incorporates actual scenes from the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song, and so it's the way it's incorporated. It's so artistically done. And it's almost, on the one hand, it's seamless, but on the other hand, it's very evident. But I think the fact that it's very evident is part of the point. It's trying to show, it's reminding us that this is actually a real or based on real events sort of thing. And there's such a funny moment in the commentary track about how they reveal about how Melvin Van Peebles, who owns the rights to the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song, actually charged Mario for royalties for use of some of those scenes, which Mario Van Peebles jokingly says about how it prevented him from using more of the shots in the film because that meant he would have to pay more royalties. But Melvin Van Peebles, I think, very affectionately also reminds him that this is a business as well. So and that's a real funny moment that starts the commentary track. And there's just so many other great moments. For instance, Mario Van Peebles is asking Melvin Van Peebles about certain aspects of making of the film and working with unions, and how Melvin Van Peebles in the making of the film insisted on having at least 50%, what he called 50% minority crew members. And also in the film Badass, Mario Van Peebles had the choice of having the characters or having the people talk directly to the camera in terms of what they described as testimonials, but without hindsight. So they were testimonials, almost like documentary type of the characters played by the actors that are featured in Badass that are based on real life people. And so these people are then interviewed on camera. Again, contemporary to the moments that they're describing. So it's not like they're talking after the fact, but they're talking in the moment. And so this is a real interesting choice. And indeed, Melvin Van Peebles in the commentary track applauds this choice by Mario Van Peebles to do this. They talk, this gives Melvin Van Peebles also the opportunity to talk about how certain details about how the film was made, the significance of the contribution of Regis Philbin, for example. Mario Van Peebles mentions how his own, he has his own children feature in Badass in a very key symbolic role in terms of the angel and the way in which Mario Van Peebles is trying to show the imagination of Melvin Van Peebles. There's a real clever way in which Mario Van Peebles in the film uses mirrors, and the way in which Melvin Van Peebles is seen walking into a particular mirror image into a completely different environment and world, and how this is to try to show us what was the point in which Melvin Van Peebles, the artist, decided he wanted to make SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. And also just great details too. Then there's the very controversial scene involving Mario Van Peebles as a young boy at the very opening of the film SWEETBACK. And this opens up, I think, a really fascinating conversation between father and son about this scene. They talk about the hair cutting and how there was that possibility that Mario's hair might have had to have been cut in order to serve the scene of the film, but it ended up not being cut. But Mario was expressing gratitude that the choice was made not to have his hair cut, but Melvin is also saying that he still would have had his hair cut. So there's a certain streak if you will, in the conversation here, I would suggest, where maybe Melvin Van Peebles is not outwardly showing a type of somewhat sensitivity in terms of displaying a type of understanding that he's not necessarily displaying a sense of understanding for the feelings of his son at the time. And indeed, Mario Van Peebles has these really interesting moments in the commentary about how, on the one hand, he could understand what Melvin Van Peebles was trying to get at when Melvin Van Peebles made the decision to cast his own son and to have him perform in this particular opening scene involving a woman in the bed. But at the same time, Mario in the commentary says it's not something that he would have chosen, which is such an interesting moment as well, which shows, I think, again, the nuanced complexity of having this particular choice being made for this moment, which is, again, very controversial, very uneasy, and very disturbing on a lot of levels. And Mario Van Peebles, I think, of all people, is expressing, on the one hand, his maybe discomfort or maybe disagreement with the choice. At the same time, he's acknowledging Melvin Van Peebles as the artist and the creator of this particular film. So this moment, I think, in this subtle way in this commentary track, is addressed so profoundly. And it indeed does open up the discussion about how appropriate this particular scene is. And so, but I think Mario Van Peebles focuses on it, but he also recognizes the extraordinary nature of the film and other aspects of the production as well. And so, and in fact, in the film Badass, this scene or this moment is expressed in a way that's, I think, very morally ambiguous as well. And we do get a sense of maybe the artist Melvin Van Peebles, as portrayed by Mario Van Peebles in the film Badass, the 2004 film. There is a sense of maybe his drive is really blinding him to the certain aspects of the disturbing nature of the scene. At the same time, we also see in the film made by Mario Van Peebles the actual character of the young boy Mario Van Peebles in the film reacting and responding to this particular scene, and he gets there's an exchange between him and another crew member about this particular scene, and there's a type of almost sense of satisfaction in a way, and there's no sense of shame or embarrassment when they're seeing this film. One particular point, though, we should point out in the film Badass is, as I mentioned, the film Badass does incorporate certain scenes from the actual film Sweetback. But interestingly enough, whenever it comes to this particular moment in the film, there is no recreation. Okay, I'm sorry, take a step back. Sometimes Badass also recreates those scenes using the contemporary actors from the film Badass. And sometimes it borrows the shots from Sweetback, the film itself. When it comes to this opening scene, it's very interesting. It doesn't show any of the opening scene itself, the direct, quote-unquote, maybe offending parts of it. And also, it doesn't have the young actor in the film Badass recreating these scenes. It has always relying on the underlying footage from the film Sweetback, the 71 film itself. So this in itself, I would suggest, is maybe an underlying way in which Mario Van Peebles, the artist, is also dealing with this particular moment. I would suggest, he mentioned, remember, in the earlier discussion with Elvis Mitchell on disc 1, he says the film Badass was a type of psychotherapy for him on celluloid. And so I think I would make a guess that maybe part of that has to do with this particular episode in the film. But there are also ways in which this is shown in a way that is not wholly negative or detrimental, which is, I think, also adding to the nuance or complexity of the moment. But in any event, this commentary track is so great too, and for other reasons, because he also mentions the idea of the $500 and Earth, Wind, and Fire, and the coincidence of the figure $500, which is such an interesting detail. He also mentions Ron Jeremy and the possibility of him being involved in the film. It ended up not happening. I'm talking about Badass. It ended up not happening, but that's another interesting detail. These and other reasons make the commentary track between Mario Van Peebles and Melvin Van Peebles, I think, essential listening, together with the film Badass, which is, I think, in many ways essential viewing in terms of its relation to the underlying 71 work, but also as a work in and of itself. So Really great stuff. So this is the film Badass on disc 2. But then we get to the supplemental features on disc 2. And so we have the set of supplements on disc 1, and now on disc 2 we have another set of supplements, starting with what is called The Story of Badass, The Birth of Black Cinema. This is from 2004, approximately 21 minutes. And this is talking about the making of Badass, but also the making of Badass that it's focusing in on SWEETBACK'S Badass song, and how this is really, in many ways, the sort of landmark milestone film that started what is often referred to as modern American independent cinema, and also modern black cinema. And its significance cannot be overemphasized enough. I mean, it's such a significant work in this and other ways, and talking about how it coincided with types of social and political attitudes stemming from civil rights, stemming from the shock of the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and how these attitudes were there in the environment, in the feelings that led to, or that set off the artist Melvin Van Peebles to want to make SWEETBACK'S Badass song. And the idea here, that one of the quotes here is the authenticity of the experience of being black, and how this is one of those stories. And so and also making the film on his own terms, on Melvin Van Peebles' own terms. And then Michael Mann, the filmmaker Michael Mann, who's involved in the producing of this film Badass, he talks about how he went to see the film SWEETBACK'S Badass song upon its initial release on a date with his wife, and so that's a really fascinating detail as well. And there's also the idea of life imitating art, imitating life in the context of Badass, and the making of its parallels with the making of SWEETBACK, etc. And then the legacy of the film as well, and the parallels and the similarities. And so this is a great documentary about the making of Badass, Mario Van Peebles' film. It's about the focusing in on the Melvin Van Peebles work from '71, SWEETBACK'S Badass song, and also it's focusing in on the context of this film in the overall sweep of American history and cinema history as well. So please check this out if you can. It's so worth it. And that's not all. On the second disc, we have another supplement which is called Melvin Van Peebles, The Real Deal. This is from 2002, approximately 22 minutes. And this is footage of Melvin Van Peebles talking one-on-one in a type of interview fashion, but also intercut are some scenes of him walking the streets of Paris, because we also know that he lived in Paris throughout much of his life. And so here we have him talking about his career, about Watermelon Man, about SWEETBACK. He's also shown to be very playful in terms of the visual skits almost that he has seen interacting with. He's walking on the streets, but he's also there's a sort of a performative aspect to it in some of the skit performances, almost like a comic sketch, which is very much, I think, reflective of the humor of Melvin Van Peebles. It's so evident here and elsewhere. But it's great to see here. And also he's then talking in great detail in the interviews about the rugged nature of the making of a film like SWEETBACK, and how there were and the financing stories, and he's talking about a particular episode involving his girlfriends, and there's a story about his being able to get workers' compensation due to something that happened to him while on set. He's talking about him being self-taught, a self-taught filmmaker, and the like. And so a great example of the spirit, the character and personality of Melvin Van Peebles, as well as more great insight from him himself, from the artist himself, about this film and the other aspects of his career. So please check it out if you can. The Real Deal, approximately 22 minutes from 2002. And then that's not all, because then we get a 2004 Directors Guild of America based discussion between Melvin Van Peebles and Mario Van Peebles. And so this is approximately 44 minutes. It's called Visual History with Melvin Van Peebles. And here we have the discussion with Melvin Van Peebles about his film memories. Mario Van Peebles asks him about what are his earliest film memories, and he talks about going to the cinema, going to the double bills or the double features or triple features, etc., and enjoying it, and then talking about what was the circumstance or the circumstances of him becoming a director. And he talks very directly about how he hired himself. He had this idea of film as a professional job, and he was trying to make films, and he tried to figure out early on how much a film would cost. He didn't know at this point the difference between 35 and 16, and he wanted to make his feature, which ended up being an 11-minute short film. And when he saw the film, when he said he projected it under the crib of his son Mario, he realized when he saw it that he felt that this could work as a film, and that gave him confidence to continue on. And then he also discusses how later in his life, he wasn't necessarily maybe inspired early in his childhood by other filmmakers, but maybe later in his life, he was introduced to filmmakers like Orson Welles or Kurosawa or Eisenstein. And so he describes how he first saw Battleship Potemkin, or he saw a first Kurosawa film, or he saw the film Citizen Kane, and how this became in many ways a type of education for him. But also he emphasizes how much in terms of him being self-taught and just learning by doing and just by instinct. And that instinct serves him so well because he has this deep intellect that also serves this brilliant creative artistic instinct that also serves him so well throughout his entire career. And things that he looks for in a script, he describes about how he wants scripts to be quote-unquote page turners. And he likes the idea of certain messages in his films, the idea of sermons, but also sermons delivered in a means that are also very comic and very witty and very funny. And this is also very indicative of the type of personality that he has. Again, a very funny and witty and humorous individual. And also talks about working with writers and working with actors, and sometimes there is a rehearsal process, and sometimes it's like he describes it, Melvin Van Peebles uses the phrase, it's like jazz music. And so I think this is referring to the idea that depending on the situation, he will design a particular working relationship, and so trying to get at what it is he is going for, the essence of what it is he's going for. Around the 30-minute mark, he talks about a certain French expression, which is another one of those laugh-out-loud moments for me. So if you're watching this particular interview with him, check out what he says around the 30-minute mark. Again, it's very, very funny. And also talking about music, and talking about how music is very important, and talking about design and how he is very much operating based on his budget, but he's still using everything to the max. And so this is such a great example, once again, of the spirit and the creative energy and the humor and the type of just direct nature of Melvin Van Peebles, the artist and the human being. So a great discussion between Mario Van Peebles and Melvin Van Peebles, again focusing in on Melvin Van Peebles, the art and the artist. So please check that out if you can. And so, my friends, that concludes our discussion of the release by Criterion from 2021 of this film, SWEETBACK'S Badass Song, the 2-disc set, which also has on the second disc the Mario Van Peebles work, Badass. So you get 2 films here, and you get 2 sets of supplements, some focusing in on the aspect of Badass, and others focusing primarily on Melvin Van Peebles and SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. But in any event, my friends, you're getting a real total package of a release in terms of the exploration of this, as I say, this extraordinary, unforgettable, oftentimes very challenging work from this filmmaker and artist, Melvin Van Peebles. This is the film SWEETBACK'S Badass Song. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.